It is so important to show people of all colors, all shapes, all sizes. I think our show is really wonderfully cast in that way. And I also believe that it's so important to see that on television, to see that in film.
I think we all know that representation in film is not where it needs to be, but it's exciting to come to work on a show that has so many Indigenous artists on it and that is led by a showrunner, Chris, who has been so thoughtful and diligent in his incorporation of Indigenous artists from all aspects.
Having authentic Indigenous representation has always been at the forefront on this show since we started. Everybody knows Indigenous people have been rendered invisible by TV and film for 100 years. So it's the only way to portray it now is authentically if you want to do it right. And we go to a lot of lengths to try to do that.
I always thought acting was a means to change, especially among my own people. I've used media my whole career to make those positive changes. We're gonna smudge that umbilical cord, wrap it in this buckskin. We'll keep it in a cedar box, put it in the house. We do this to keep the kid from wandering too far.
How do we represent Indigenous people authentically when we are so complex and our histories are so complex and no two of us look the same and no one of us can speak for all of us?
One huge thing is getting Indigenous writers. I mean, we had Taz Chavez and we had Tommy Pico, and this gives us the opportunity to have, these characters written from an Indigenous lens, which we don't often get. We get Indigenous characters written from a white lens, so it kind of becomes, a trope of what people think Indigenous people are like.
It's like every time I leave the city and come back to the res, they gotta invite everybody over.
I think it has a humanizing effect for us, but then also, there's a kid who's gonna watch the show and they're gonna see a queer weirdo. There is a Native kid who's gonna see a Native queer weirdo on TV. I never saw that. And it might not be liberating for me, but it's liberating for that person.
Our storytellers are getting more access. Stories are more told somewhat more accurately, though there's a lot of learning to do between cultures and young people growing up outside their culture.
We pulled on a cultural consultant from the Southern Ute tribe named Kenny Frost, who's been incredible for season 1 and season 2. And talked to him about a lot of the traditions that the Southern Utes have. So that's always been very important to us, to try to do that as authentically as possible.
It's not just enough to hire an Indigenous person, you also have to listen to them, and the writers definitely did.
We had, a beautiful episode on Family Day, and we're able to see, Native artists and entrepreneurs in the back who are in the background who, have their booths set up. It's just a really thoughtful process that has gone on to be, inclusive, especially knowing where we're shooting, and there's a lot of Indigenous entrepreneurs and artists, and it's just a great way to kind of give an extra level to the storytelling because it's realistic, and the show takes place in Colorado and there's Indigenous people there, so it kind of gives a really authentic layer to the storytelling, which I think is really important, and I think everybody is taken really seriously, and it's been done with a lot of care.
You are Native American.
I am Nooch.
What is Nooch?
It means the people.
It's been really exciting to have Indigenous characters in a show that doesn't necessarily focus on indigeneity. It kind of lets us exist in a way that we don't really get to see often.
I wanted to make sure it's clear that to America and anyone watching that there are Native American and Indigenous people that are living life with us. And in Trevor Carroll's case, he just happens to be a great actor. So at the time, we were looking for someone to work with Darcy up on avalanche control in episode 103, I think was the first one he came in on in the first season. And that could be a role anyone could play. We cast Trevor Carroll in this role, and then we don't really say much about the fact that he's Indigenous. He just happens to be a guy in the world.
It's not like they're hitting people over the head with a hammer and just trying to shove a bunch of Native people into the show. We're real people and we're real characters, and we're represented like that on screen, so it's very refreshing to be able to have that.
Jay is someone that's always looking to make lemonade, so to speak. She's really on a mission now to write her own story.
Dan is from a local community near Patience, Colorado, and I owned Joe's Diner.
Kayla can be a mom, a young mom, and she can be a best friend, and she can be a cousin, and she can be a daughter, and she can be all of these things, you know, in her own Indigenous way. But also we could just be, you know, characters on TV that are, you know, having the same issues as everyone else. We're not, you know, a monolith. We aren't in leather and feathers all the time.
Natives are no longer metaphors. They're characters, and that's really important.
To get to be part of a project full of beautiful Indigenous people, but a project that isn't just about indigeneity, that is just, like, this is it's a geeky sci-fi alien show that happens to have Indigenous people in the town where he crash landed. And we don't get to see a lot of that type of representation, where we just get to exist.